Hello.
Hello.
There we go. We'll start in a few minutes.
Well, how are you?
Doing okay. A little bored.
Your hair's getting longer.
My hair is getting longer. Working a lot. Eating too much.
Uh,
Sitting around too much. Yeah, we try and get out and walk, but it doesn't always happen.
well, it's a little bit difficult. You've got to pick your moment because so many people seem to go out at the same time. So
Right.
you want to avoid crowds. Good
Yeah.
news is our next door neighbor who left in an ambulance in March came home today.
Oh, thank God.
Yes, yes.
That's good news. Yep. Yeah, it's been a little crazy. I'm actually going to the States, so that's going to be really interesting.
Oh,
Um,
how are you getting across the border? I guess you can fly.
I can drive. I've been
Okay.
told I can drive.
Hmm.
Yeah, as because I'm a citizen of the U.S., so they can't turn me away.
Hmm.
They have to take. Um,
Okay,
You're
you're gonna
willingly going?
so don't pick your nose.
I'm going.
Okay?
I have to head down mid-July, or sort of the beginning, the second week of July. Hello, and so I'm going down to take care of my mom's house, probably with kids, and then I'll come home. I'll have a 2-week isolation, and then I actually will have to go back because Karen is headed off to American University in Washington D.C. They are opening. They've set it up where there are a lot of students who are staying home and doing classes digitally. And there are students, there are a lot of international students who can't get visas. So there will be fewer people on campus. But they've promised all of the freshmen and sophomores their own rooms.
Oh,
So
good,
that's
good.
how one of the things they're doing is masks are mandated everywhere. Class sizes are smaller. If it's a large class, they'll do that digitally, and students the only people who can come into your dorm are people who actually live in your dorm, and if students have their own room, there is socially distant social space on campus that they've set up. So it's going to be interesting, but she moves in mid-August, so we'll head south, we'll come back, we'll have our isolation period in Canada, and then we'll head south again. We'll like come back, I don't know, come back, be nice. I don't know what it's gonna be. We'll figure it out.
Well, at
So
least you're not crossing provinces anymore, are you? Your son is finished with Halifax, yeah.
he's home. He actually today was accepted to a program in Israel, and hopefully he can go. So he wants to go study at. There's a place called Pardes, which is an independent, interdenominational, or non-denominational, however you want to look at it, uh, study place of study, a yeshiva, and he's been accepted there. He wants to go and start doing some studies that will then lead to graduate work. So we'll see. I don't know if he can. I don't know if we can get it together in the time we have to have him have a place to stay, and because they don't have dorms, and I don't know
Oh,
what they'd be doing. So um, we have family there, but they're a little distant for an everyday commute. I mean, it's doable, but it's not ideal. It also depends on what the lockdown situation is in Israel.
hmm.
Right now, they're going up again, so there's a question as to whether or not they're on with with non-gluten, with gluten-free flours for Passover, and all different ways of doing it. But it was a dish that we took from someplace else and managed to make our own. So that's the way we've worked wherever we've gone. And it's really important to realize that Jews have always been part of the fabric of wherever we've lived, and there are histories of Jewish communities in Shanghai, histories in Rome, in Australia, in Brazil, Scotland. Chaim Herzog, who becomes the president of Israel, comes from a very prominent Scottish family. In Iraq, in Ethiopia, in Canada. Sometimes the histories are very long, sometimes they're a stopover. But when we come here, how are we going to live here? So my kids, all three of them, went through the day school system here in Toronto. And one of the projects they do is a roots project. The year that most of the kids become bar bat mitzvah, they're supposed to do a history about their families. And one of the big questions is, how did we get here? And so here goes the teacher asking, I don't remember which kid it was first, probably Jesse who answered this first, although it might have been Gavi since he's a little more flippant than Jesse, who said, you know, how did we get here? We just drove here. Because we just drove up. For him, the question was, well, we came from the United States. We're new immigrants. The question was really asking, how did your family get to North America? But the question was phrased, how did you come to Canada? He said, we came for a job. So, which is really similar to, we came for a better life, right? We came for a job. This was where the good job was. And so we did that, and we came across into Canada. And in doing so, we tried to throw ourselves into Canadian culture as much as we would throw ourselves into American culture if we were in the US. Interestingly, as Americans living in Canada, we also continue to celebrate certain American holidays. So the questions abound. On Canada Day, do you wear red and white? Do you have a beer, a Canadian craft beer maybe? Do you celebrate Thanksgiving? One of the weird questions we got here, and it's one of the stories I enjoy, my parents would come up for American Thanksgiving every year. My father schlepping a turkey, because for whatever reason, he would say, it's cheaper. It's cheaper if I buy it. Well, it was much cheaper for us since we, of course, didn't pay for it at all. So it was great. I was like, you know, Dad, we have turkeys in Canada, but he would always bring one. And my mother went over to school to pick up the kids. Karen was in preschool at the time. I guess JK, Gavi was in SK, and she picked up Gavi and Karen from school and Jesse to bring them home. And Gavriel's teacher said to her, Happy Thanksgiving, knowing that my parents had come to celebrate American Thanksgiving. Later, after she'd left, Karen's teacher came over to Michelle, to Gavriel's teacher, and said to her, and Michelle shared this with me, she's a good friend, said to Michelle, is Jennifer's mother not Jewish? And Michelle was like, why would you ask that? I said, well, you wished her Happy Thanksgiving. Jews don't celebrate Thanksgiving. And Michelle proceeded to say, no, American Jews very much celebrate Thanksgiving. It's a very important holiday for them. And that's true. But I'd say, and I stress this every year, I don't think a year has gone by since we've been here where I have not encouraged people to celebrate Canadian Thanksgiving. Now I understand Canadian Thanksgiving and American Thanksgiving do not hold the same significance in the hearts and minds of the people in general. But I'm going to say, and there's also the added piece that Canadian Thanksgiving often overlaps with the Jewish holidays. And so most of us think, who needs another large meal? The last thing I need is to cook another large meal or eat another large meal. But the wonderful thing is with Canadian Thanksgiving, it's a beautiful time. It's an absolute lovely time. It's a time when we've driven up with friends to Algonquin and spent the day hiking in Algonquin. It's a day of giving thanks for everything that we have, for the benefits of being able to live in a place like Canada where we don't have to be judged, or wherever we are. As I know we, of course, Will and Carrie are in the US at the moment, wherever we are, that we hopefully as Jews don't have to be judged by who we are, and we can live in peace and freedom. And on top of that, in doing so, that we can say we have freedom of speech, we have freedom of religion, we have rights. we have hopefully equality under the law. And if we feel that we've been discriminated against, then there should be a legal means to deal with that. Now, in this drash at Betzedek, I had stressed that we should really celebrate the holiday. We should celebrate Canada Day and really appreciate what Canada is, what it has been to the Jewish community, what it is for all Canadians. I love the flag, Gary, thank you. And go on with that. And after services, someone came over to me, and some of you may have heard this story before. Someone came over to me extremely upset. And she could not believe that I would suggest, she wasn't happy with the sermon in general, but specifically Thanksgiving, that I would suggest that Jews celebrate a Christian holiday. Because to her, she had family members who were Christian. I don't know if she was a Jew by choice or if she was someone who was born Jewish and had other family members who were Christian. Most Jewish families have non-Jews in their family. She said her non-Jewish family go to church on Thanksgiving, and therefore to thank God for Canada, and therefore it was a Christian holiday. And no matter what I said, I could not, giving the history, could not make her understand, get her to understand that Thanksgiving is a Canadian secular holiday, and something that we should be appreciative of. Now, I want to show you, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I can, and then show you a couple of pictures. Let me now, of course, I have to remember how to do it. There it is, share screen. All right. So I want you to see this picture. Does everyone see the picture of it says crownheights.info? So this is a picture from an article about celebrating Thanksgiving. Crown Heights is in New York. This is a picture. This group of people, and my guess is, since there's a kid here in baseball gear and there's a man here in shorts, they may or may not have been part of the original group that came. This is a group, now this is a morning minion. You can see it's mostly men, except for this young girl here. This is a group that went camping for Thanksgiving. They went camping together. They brought with them, Thanksgiving in the US is a Thursday. Can you hear me, Carrie? So, all right. And I want to show you a second picture. This was a picture, I'm going to move a little closer because it looks like I was a little quiet. This is a picture that they went camping for Thanksgiving, and the article wanted to point out that this is a normal activity in the United States. In 2013,
Why no one else is saying anything?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's supposed to be, I think, because she's playing something on the screen, but the screen isn't showing up. It says you're
I can
viewing the
see.
screen.
Can you? All right, let's try this again. Can you hear me now? Am I here?
Yeah, I can hear you.
You can hear me.
Yeah.
Carrie, can you hear me? Nod yes or no.
She said she can hear.
Well, Chloe said she could hear me.
Well, I can hear you fine.
Tamisha can hear me.
I can hear you.
But no,
Yeah, I
No.
can hear you.
Okay, so Will and
Jocelyn,
Carrie.
we can,
No.
So I don't know what's going on. All right, I'm going to type while I speak, which means I'm going to speak slower and type slower. I don't know why. Whoops.
That's weird. I know.
I'm just going to type to Carrie. One moment.
She's got everybody unmuted so that she can hear us.
yeah, you're talking, never hearing you now.
I know. That's what I'm telling you.
No. Yeah, I don't
She's
know.
muted.
let's see, did that help? So, 1 minute. All right, so I'm going to suggest that Carrie and will try and sign out and sign back in. We don't really know why we stopped hearing. They stopped hearing me. Okay. So, but we'll continue. Were you able to see the screen when I shared it?
Yes, both the picnic one and then the one with the candles.
Great. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna put that back up. Actually, I'm gonna wait 1 minute. I want to see if they come back. Hopefully. I want to make sure I can let them back into the thing. So this was Thanksgiving, which coincided with Hanukkah one year. And of course, in the US, it became a big deal with US Thanksgiving, obviously not Canadian Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is what they called it. And all of a sudden, recipes started appearing, and we got recipes for things like brining a turkey. That's good. Brining a turkey. This is what happens when you stay in your house all day. Your brain turns to mush. Brining a turkey in Manischewitz wine, and all sorts of things that you might otherwise be like, ew. But that people came up with all sorts of ways of combining Thanksgiving foods, traditional Thanksgiving foods, with Hanukkah foods. So latke stuffing, all sorts of interesting things. And it became this really fun celebration. You know, one of the things I found also was a meme of Seth Rogen. And I'll share that in a moment. Just want to make sure it's small enough you can see the whole thing. All right. A meme of Seth Rogen saying he grew up thinking Jews in Canada didn't celebrate Thanksgiving until he realized his parents were just lying. And of course, the majority of the Jewish community in Thanksgiving in Canada does not celebrate Thanksgiving. And again, I think it's because it's proximity to the holidays in general. But then when Seth Rogen grew up and he ended up going out into the world and doing a lot of different things, he discovered that Jews really did celebrate Thanksgiving. And even in Canada, many Jews had taken on this celebration of Thanksgiving as an appreciation of Canadian life. Now, if you don't enjoy the secular holidays, and this is one of the reasons I think it's really important, it keeps you separate. So if everyone else, there are reasons for that. If everyone else is celebrating a great win of the World Series with whichever team you like to imagine won the World Series, and you have no interest in baseball at all, you're going to stay separate from the community that's out there celebrating. An unusual thing happened last year when the Raptors were doing so well. So suddenly everyone became a fan of basketball. And so you had the people who were Raptors fans, but then you had the people who were just thrilled that Toronto was experiencing this strange phenomenon of the Raptors doing so well. And so you end up with celebrations that brought people together and that brought it into the synagogue. So there were synagogues and other Jewish groups that set up big screen TVs and had celebrations watching the game. There were a few games that were on Saturday and coincided with Shabbat, and so you had events that happened. We're going to have Havdalah, and then we're going to watch the game, right? So you could come and register for this. We're going to do Mincha, we're going to do Mariv, we're going to do Havdalah, and then we're going to go in the other room and there'll be a TV set up there and we're going to turn it on and we're going to watch the game and we're going to have beer and wings or whatever, whatever they were serving. And it was a way of bonding with the community and a group within the community that normally didn't interact necessarily with the synagogue. This brought in a whole new group of people. Now, we also have these ideas in Judaism. There's kashrut, of course, which is the Jewish dietary laws. And within kashrut, we have some essentially Pat Yisrael, which is Jewish bread, Bishul Yisrael, which is the cooking, Jewish cooking, and not Jewish cooking culturally, but cooking done by Jews. It's the reason if you go to a kosher restaurant or you go to a kosher catering hall, that the mashgiach, the person who's in charge of the kashrut, he's the one that always turns on the oven, because the act of turning on the oven makes it his cooking or her cooking. And so that becomes Bishul Yisrael. And for some within the community, this is important. None of these pieces were created for kashrut. All of these pieces were created in order to create a division between the Jewish community and the non-Jewish community. And the reason for that is it was realized early on that if you are sharing meals and you're sharing food, that is the way people bond. And if you're bonding, then the community is going to have issues with intermarriage and assimilation. And so all of these were acts against assimilation. And of course, it's true. In places where you are going to have no interaction, and in times when we've had no interaction, in times when Jews were put into ghettos and forced to live separately, of course there's no interaction because you never meet anybody. Now, this may make life a little easier for some. In the worst cases, it also leads to things like, not just in the Jewish community, but in any community where there's just in-marriage, which leads to genetic disease, which we have in the Jewish community we know of. In spades, we have a number of genetic diseases that flourish. But it also means that we're separate from the world. It leads to communities where the school system isn't necessarily living up to its responsibilities. And so last year, a little over a year ago, there was a case in Montreal where a young man in his, I believe he was in his late 20s, but I'd have to confirm that, but he was suing the school system and the province, his school system. He had gone through the Hasidic school system and he was told as a student, oh, of course, people will want to hire you because Jews are trustworthy or Jews or whatever. And interestingly, he was hearing these stereotypes from within his own community, but he discovered upon leaving his community that without a good foundation in French for Montreal, in English for other places, and in math, that he couldn't get a job. He didn't have the ability to communicate. He had a great grounding in Talmud, but he could speak Yiddish really, really well, but he lacked what you basically need for that and to work and to exist in our society. And so it has never been good for the Jewish people, and I would say has never been good for any community when a community that lives within the bigger community separates itself from that community or is deliberately separated from that community. We are seeing more in the United States, but we're seeing this spring up in other areas in Canada, in Europe, in Israel, with the issue of Black Lives Matter. We're seeing that what happened in the United States was you had a community, specifically the African American community, that was kept, and the Black community, because not all of them immigrated or ended up or were immigrated to the US from Africa. So I know some people do not like the phrase African American. You have a community that was kept separate from the larger community. And then with the ending of the Civil War, things didn't change, even though the Black community was granted its freedom. And we now, of course, all know, I hope, about Juneteenth and the idea that it took 2 years for the community, for the Blacks in Texas to learn that they'd actually been freed. You have all of this without anything really talkless done to make sure that the community wasn't kept separate. And in fact, you had the community continue to be kept separate. So as a kid, I remember driving past a house. I obviously wasn't driving with my parents. I grew up in Merrick, New York. On the town next door, there were Merrick, north-south, was long enough that it bordered on 2 towns, Freeport and Roosevelt. Freeport was more mixed between whites and Blacks, and Roosevelt was more Black. And I remember we were driving past the house, and we passed this lovely house, and my father, for whatever reason, maybe it was the first time we'd driven past there in a long time, said, "Your mother and I almost bought that house." And there was this wonderful little house. It turned out they would have had to buy a second car because it was too far from the train station. The house they bought was only a few blocks from the train station, which is what made their decision. But it would have been a very different life for me. I grew up with a wonderfully multicultural group of friends. Not that Merrick was so multicultural. It certainly wasn't. I think it was more my parents who made our house a comfortable place for people, which made it much more multicultural. But had I grown up in Roosevelt, I would have certainly been the minority, both as a Jew and as someone who presents white. Whereas if growing up in Merrick, neither of those was true. My high school, I was certainly a minority as a Jew, but not in any other way. And your experiences by being kept separate, because I know, not when my parents were moving to Merrick, but previously, the reason that Roosevelt had become this Black enclave was in the generation before, and I'm sure it went on somewhat, I know it went on somewhat when my parents were buying, people wouldn't necessarily sell to Jews or Blacks. And so Freeport, the town next door, and South Merrick, not exactly where I lived, but where the high school that was much more Jewish was, that was an area where Jews could get into, or that was an area where Blacks could get into in Freeport. But kind of where we ended up in a place, it's a section of Merrick that became very mixed, but it had taken a long time, because for a long time it was restricted, right? And whether it was restricted by religion or restricted by race, it was a place that was restricted. And when you do that, you create problems and you create negative feelings towards the group, of course, which is restricted. One of the things that we're seeing now, interestingly, in the United States is we're seeing the Black Lives Matter movement, and we're seeing for the first time, really, a mixing of the community in coming and saying, we actually appreciate each other. Now, when I planned this, and I said to Chloe, I want to talk about the holidays, and I want to talk about Jews celebrating other holidays, celebrating our national holidays, and having a foot in both worlds, this wasn't even on the radar yet. It hadn't started. It had come up a number of years ago and then kind of disappeared. But since then, of course, the Black Lives Matter, and when I'm referring to Black Lives Matter, I'm not referring to the organization Black Lives Matter, but rather the movement and the protests about Black lives being important. And that being the issue that's on the table right now, rather than the charitable organization or the political organization, which in the US can be the same. So here, what I'm sharing is a picture. The Amish community came out for a Black Lives Matter protest. This is something that garnered a lot of news in the United States because this has never happened before. If we want to talk about communities that keep themselves separate, right? When we think about the Jewish community, we can think about the Hasidim, but at the same time, we have Jews from Orthodox to secular within religion, and then of course, Orthodox to Reform, and then of course, secular Jews who participate in the greater community. But the Amish, both here and in the United States, still do really keep themselves separate, but they also recognize that they're part of a larger community. And I was, as a child, I didn't grow up fully observant. And as a child, my family used to go and vacation in Amish area of Pennsylvania. And then we would stay at a Mennonite bed and breakfast. And so I was able to learn a lot about the Amish community. They deliberately keep themselves separate. And if you want to have a foot in both worlds, that's not possible. At some point, you have to make a choice. As a child from that community, you have to make a choice and say, I'm going to now fully immerse myself into the Amish community, and I'm going to spend my life here. I'm going to marry here. I'm going to raise my family here. I'm going to do that. Or you're going to leave. And it's not shunned necessarily that you're going to leave, but it's understood that if people kept a foot in both worlds, that their community could not be what it is today, that it would have to change, okay? Unlike, I would say the Hasidic community is very much like that, which also here, this is also from the Black Lives Matter protests. This is specifically a Lubavitch group marching out to go join a Black Lives Matter protest. So this particular picture that you're seeing is just those from the Lubavitch community, but that's the picture I chose to use. But the later pictures in the article showed them amongst a much larger crowd. And one of the reasons, I will say the Crown Heights, this was specifically in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. The Crown Heights community has been splintered. There's the Jewish community and there's the Black community, the Hasidic Jewish community and the Black community. And they have traditionally been very splintered. And I remember being I think I was still in seminary when a Hasidic kid had been hit by a car. It was a hit and run. And there were riots between the communities in Crown Heights because unfortunately that car was driven by a Black individual. And there became these riots, this community against that community, fighting each other. And it wasn't that the Black community committed this hit and run. It was one individual acting badly who happened to do this. And it was realized at the time, after the riots, that it was really important for the communities to learn about each other. But out of that article where that last picture I showed you came from, it was a quote that said, until now, the outreach from the Jewish community to the Black community was intended to keep the peace and be mutually beneficial, right? So they went through this time of rioting and fighting and realized that if they didn't interact on some level, that it would lead to more animosity and rioting. But this man goes on, so he says, now we are trying to reach out in solidarity and allyship, expecting nothing in return. It opens the door to build real allyship with the Black community to build a better tomorrow. And this is why being part of the greater community is so important. Because without it, we're basically standing on our own. Toronto, I don't know if people have seen the Toronto Awaits commercial. I'm gonna see if I can find it while we're talking. Toronto Awaits is an ad that was put together kind of like, I think for tourism. All right, give me one second. I found it. I'm just, oh. And it's really a wonderful piece. Let me go back and I want to show this to you because it points out why it's so important, I think, that we interact with each other. Ah, you didn't play. There we go.
Spring is here.
And we're still inside.
So here's a little love letter to remind us of the city we miss so much.
Toronto.
So beautiful that even our vowels say, ooh.
This city. When you look up, it's concrete and glass.
But when you look in, it's all heart.
The most multicultural city in the world.
The home of away,
Not a melting pot, but a potluck.
where you bring who you are and you share it.
You can't define us. Our culture is all cultures.
Not known for any one thing, because we've got every damn thing.
Toronto. We're famous for our modesty.
The second T is silence.
And right now, we shouldn't be.
Yeah, we're not New York, we're not Tokyo, we're not any of these either.
Because we took all the best bits of all the best places.
and made them into a city unlike any other.
So count the hours,
And start making plans.
because every day we stay inside,
Brings us one day closer to being home again.
Now, of course, that was very Toronto-centric. I get that. But it made some amazing points. One, it said that Toronto is the most multicultural city in the world. And it is, whoops. Vimeo started playing the next video. And the thing about the Jewish community is we've also had the wonderful benefit of being everywhere and being able to be part of the community wherever we go and being a multicultural community as a result of being wherever we go, right? There is a wonderful Jewish community in Shanghai. There's a wonderful Jewish community in Hong Kong. There are communities in Australia, and in all the cities I mentioned, all the places, the countries I mentioned earlier, England and Holland and Germany and Chile and Brazil and in Uganda and Zimbabwe and of course here in Canada and in the United States. And when you go to these communities, yeah, you're gonna find probably some what Israelis refer to as Anglo-Jews, who are Jews that present white. Usually, it used to mean Jews that spoke English, but the French in Israel often get included in the Anglo community. So I think it's really just those Jews that aren't, that present in a certain way, specifically from Western Europe. But you also have South America, and you also have Italy, and you also have Greece, and you also have Iraq and Iran and Syria, and you have Jews from all of these communities with all of these backgrounds, and they come and we celebrate together. And we've managed, not always perfectly, In fact, often not so perfectly, but we've managed to say that regardless of our somewhat cultural differences, regardless of whether you come from Iran or Hong Kong or New York, and yeah, I know I mentioned a country and two cities. Well, two countries in a city. I don't know why I did that, but regardless of, I think I added New York because that's where I'm initially from. Regardless of whether you come from Iraq or from Hong Kong or from the United States, you have traditions and you have a basic foundation which we can share. And it's what's kept the Jewish community as the Jewish community. So that's why if you're Jewish, you can walk into a synagogue anywhere and say, hi, I'm Jewish. And people will be able to participate nicely, and no one's going to question why you're there. And I know that some people get questioned. There are times where people walk into a synagogue, happens more often to Jews of color than to others, but it does happen to others depending on the community, where people come in and they say, why, what are you doing here? Can I help you? Or they ask weird questions. If I see someone in the synagogue who I haven't seen before, I like to walk over and just say Shabbat Shalom, or hi, I'm Rabbi Gorman. I don't understand why people don't do that, but we do get those experiences. But it also means that when you go somewhere, if you go to a community and you say, hi, I'm Jewish, and this happens more outside North America than it does in North America, but you walk in and you say, hi, I'm here, I'm Jewish, people will say, would you like to come over for a Shabbat meal? Can I feed you a Shabbat meal? Can I invite you to something? There are people at the Kotel who may or may not hold your hashkafa, your view of Judaism, but if you go to the Kotel on Friday night, there are people there who are just there to say, are you Jewish? Would you like to come for dinner? Like, that's their whole thing. Let's see what we can do for you. And it's kept the Jewish community unified and connected so that there's a feeling of family wherever you are. Now, growing up in the United States, there's definitely what positively can be called mythos of the United States, and negatively can be called propaganda, and I think that's true in most places. And it's the idea that America's a melting pot. I grew up with this. America's a melting pot. We put everyone in. We all add our flavors, and we all become American. Now, it's a lovely idea. It doesn't really work completely, as we're seeing well from the issues. And it's not just Black Lives Matter that's protesting in the U.S., but the protests against wearing masks, and the protests that we're seeing we're seeing multiple almost civil wars. They're right now they're cold wars, but they're going on in the U.S. over politics, over culture, over socioeconomic level, and over race, and probably over religion too. And it's where the melting pot has really failed. But one thing that Canada gets right, and some places in the United States do get really right, that video said, we're not a melting pot, we're a potluck, where everyone brings the best they have and we all get to taste it, right? The great thing, as someone who came to Canada and we've spent 15 years here, who came to Canada and raised my children here, Canada has its problems, but at least by policy makes it a thing that you want to do, to say we are multicultural and we care about being multicultural, and we don't want you to take your culture and bury it under being Canadian. We want to take your culture and celebrate it as part of Canada. And if you are lucky enough to live in a country where your culture can be celebrated, which means, we can, it means that Rob Sean and I get invitations to Ramadan meals. And it's why we can have our Shabbat table surrounded by people who aren't Jewish, who have come to share Shabbat with us. That just makes the celebration that much more interesting and that much better for all of us. It means we can share and we can have discussions, and that keeping people out of our own communities, or being so insular that we don't let people into our communities, that comes from a place of fear, and it comes from a place of paranoia. And it comes from a weakness that says, my community isn't strong enough to survive enjoying being part of the greater community or interacting with the world out there. So if we can say, here we are in Canada together, and we're going to celebrate Canada Day and the good things it stands for. And I know that in the past, I would say even number of years, 5 years, even longer, there have been issues over, well, if we celebrate things like Canada Day, or in the US, the 4th of July, or if we celebrate Thanksgiving, or we celebrate other days, we are celebrating times when the European white community then came and created colonies here and ignored the fact that there were indigenous people here. And while, of course, I would never want to brush that history underneath the rug, we can also look, and as Jews, we do this all the time. We can look and we can interpret and we can say, well, I can acknowledge my history, and I can also use this to celebrate what we've become and where we can go when we're going to be better. So instead of ignoring Canada Day can become a celebration of what did we get right, a admittance of what did we get wrong, and a time to look towards the future. Thanksgiving can be a day where we actually do give thanks for what we got right, or do it almost, it comes very close to Yom Kippur. We can use it as a time to do tshuva as a community. I mean, if you think about tshuva is a looking inside our communal soul. We're supposed to have already looked inside our individual soul, and now we look at our communal soul and we say, what have we done right? Okay, good. What have we done wrong? And we acknowledge it publicly. And then we go on to say, well, what do we want for the future? And how do we want to make sure that the wrong things don't happen again? And how do we want to build community? How do we want to interact with each other? So Thanksgiving, maybe it shouldn't be a time to have that big giant meal, but a time to get outside and go be with, when it's safe, or so properly socially distant, to be outside in the community and interact with different people. One of the great things, and one of the things I love about Thanksgiving in the United States, is it's the only time, it's the only holiday where it's not about your family alone, but this often happens. Sometimes it happens on Thanksgiving, but it often happens either over the weekend or the Wednesday night before. While technically Thanksgiving in the US is one day, it's actually multiple days. First you have Erev Thanksgiving, which is Wednesday night, then you have Thanksgiving, then Friday you have Chol HaMoed Thanksgiving, and then you have Shabbat Thanksgiving, and then Sunday you're recovering. So you get that whole piece. The weekend, whether it's Friday night or Saturday or Sunday, or Friday morning for Jews, I'm speaking, or whether it's often Wednesday night, you will get interfaith services, which we don't normally do. We don't normally have the opportunity to interact religiously and share that piece of us with others in our community, in our greater Canadian community, or our greater American community. Excuse me. So this is a wonderful time where we can say, we do want to give thanks. And it doesn't even have to be religious thanks. It can be a secular gathering of multiple communities where we can see, what did we get right? Where did we go wrong? And how are we going to build for the future? And how much do we appreciate that we're able to come together and do this? But if we never participate in those secular holidays, we lose out. And not just we, not just we in the Jewish community, but we in the greater community lose out from being part of all of this. So I've now given my Josh, I've been speaking for about 50 minutes straight. So I want to throw out to questions and see if people have pieces to add or comments, questions, good and welfare, what have you. Anyone?
Oh, hi. Yeah. No, I think everything you said is great. I think I'm looking at it from many different aspects, in a sense, being, well, a Black person who is from Jamaica, who moved to Canada, who is in close proximity to the US, and also being a Jew. I think for me, if I had a choice between, I guess, say, moving to Canada versus moving to the US, my choice would definitely be Canada, because just witnessing the things that have unfolded in the US, and I work with IBM, and IBM is in 170 different countries. So right. I am always in touch with a lot of IBMers all over the world. And since everything has been happening in the US, we have been seeing a lot of American IBMers coming forward and just talking about the experience that they have had in the US. Whether it's as Black, I had one colleague who happened to be white, who's married to someone who's Black and who's also Jewish. And he was talking about his experience as a Jewish man who happens to be white, but married to a Black person, and with the attack on the synagogue that happened in Pittsburgh, and right. just the interracial problems that he have married someone Black, it just seems like, to me, there seems to be a lot more segregation in the US than here in Canada. And even I hear Jamaicans, like a Black Jamaican who lives in America, just feel like it's different to be there being Black, because they're in school, they're most likely asked, are you sure you're supposed to be doing this course? Like, they're questioned. And I've been in Canada for, I would say, I came here in 96. So what's that, like 23 years? I've been in Canada for quite a long time, and I've gone to high school and university and now working for IBM, and never once did I felt like I needed to be anything less than myself. I can always be the authentic me. And I don't feel like I am a Black person in Canada. I just feel like I'm Kamisha, living in Canada, who happens to be Black. And I have to say, even when I got converted to Judaism, and I did my first conversion in London, Ontario, at the shul there, and since I started at Pride of Israel, I mean, I've been at Pride of Israel for almost 2 years now, and from day one, I never felt like I was a Black person in a synagogue. I mean, it's just, I just felt like, of course, Martin and Saul, they have been just my two best buddies, but I've always felt like in Canada, we welcome people differently. Like, we don't let them feel like they're a color. They feel like they're a person. And that's what I do get from Canada, because even in university, there was 5 of us that hang out. There was Erica, who's, our parents are from India. Samidika is from Pakistan. Aliyah is from Egypt. And Omera is from Afghanistan. And the 5 of us are best friends until this day. So, right. Yeah, and so I feel like I get what you're saying when it comes to Canada and sharing the different holidays and just being a part of it, and not necessarily just separating yourself to your own religion. I mean, I have friends who goes to church who said, can I come to shul with you? I'm like, yeah, whenever you're ready, you can come.
Mhm.
So I feel that's a good thing.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kamisha. No, and I think
Mm.
I'm having been part of the Pride of Israel community for the last 11 years. It's a great welcoming community. I think to everyone. I think that when people walk in general, there's just an assumption that you walked into shul, and therefore you're meant to walk into shul. So no one, there's no idea of, are you sure you're in the right place? Most people don't wander into a building mistakenly, right? You know, they pretty much know where they are. So there's an assumption that anyone, doesn't matter if you what color you are, it doesn't matter if you're male, if you're female, if you're tall, if you're short, whatever you are, you know, you came to synagogue, so we assume you meant to come to synagogue. And you know, people might say, oh, if you come in, they might say, I haven't seen you before, I'm so-and-so, or I haven't seen you before, welcome to Pride of Israel. I think that's certainly an attitude and an environment that Rav Sean has tried to create there. And I think it's a community that was open to that. And I hope, I would like to think most of our communities are like that. I know most people in most of our communities are like that, but it doesn't always translate to everyone. And unfortunately, in many communities, there are people who say, and not just Jewish communities, I mean every community, there are people who say stupid things, like, do you know why you're here? I was speaking with a woman. She's now the executive director at Beit Raim. She, you know, a Jewish woman, happens to also be Black, and she had gone into one of the kosher restaurants, and when she came up to the counter, she was asked, the person said to her, you do know this is a kosher restaurant? And she said, well, I hope so. That's why I would eat here. And I remember when I was discussing this and she shared this with me, I said, why would you ever say that? I mean, even, first of all, it's not like communion in church, which is meant specifically for a particular group. And if you're not, you know, if you're in a Catholic church and you're not Catholic or Anglican or possibly some of the other higher Protestant sects, you don't belong there taking communion. It's meant for a specific in crowd. Who cares who eats first? So my first reaction was, in what way should the person behind the counter care at all about who buys their food? They should just be like, welcome, can I take your order? Welcome to our restaurant. But also, the idea that someone would then call out one person because of what she looked like was so foreign to me. And I would hope, I hope that it's foreign to most people, but you know, anyone can know from reading the news or looking at social media or watching the news or wherever, that it's unfortunately not so foreign. And people question all the time, what are you doing here? There was, I think I shared it on Twitter, I'd have to find it, but there was a wonderful article, a woman a friend who was white asked her to explain white privilege. It was asked in a message, you know, a text, and she said, she wrote an article on it. I can't explain it. And it's simple things like that. If you've never walked into a restaurant and, you know, if you're Jewish, you've never walked into a kosher restaurant, you have to question why you're there, that's white privilege. That's the explanation. That was one of her, she wasn't talking about a kosher restaurant, but one of her friends. This woman was a graduate of Harvard University, and she shared 2 experiences with people, which said she was going off to Harvard, and people said to her, you mean the one in Massachusetts? Like, is there another Harvard? And why would you ask for that? Just, you know, not because I thought there was another Harvard, but because of the color of her skin. And she could figure that out. She was one of the places she was at a UPS depot or drop-off location. And this isn't to say something about UPS. This was, unfortunately, every community has people who say stupid things and think stupid things. The person, I don't remember what city it was in, but the person behind the counter, students were dropping their stuff off to be shipped to university. The kid in front of her brought his stuff up, put it on the counter. She said, oh, where are you going to school? He said, Princeton. She said, congratulations. She came up, she put her stuff on the counter. Woman said, where are you going to school? She said, Harvard. And the response was, you mean the one in Massachusetts? It's like, why would that be such a thing? But I've also discovered, and this is the reason why it's so important, to step outside our bubbles sometime and be part of the greater community, outside of whether it's outside of the Jewish bubble or outside of our friend bubble or whatever. I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a wonderfully multicultural group of friends. So I had friends who were white and friends who were black and friends who were Indian and friends who were Asian. I had friends specifically from Germany, Korea, India, and the others probably were born. So those three were born outside the United States. Actually, I'm sorry. My friend Raj, who was born in India, he wasn't born in India. His parents were born in India. Everyone else was probably more generations in. But we all came from somewhere, and we got to share different things. So I went to church with friends of mine, and I can remember my brother and I going over to my friend Kelly's house to help decorate their Christmas tree. And my parents weren't worried that by sending me, but by being invited to help decorate Kelly's Christmas tree, and then my parents allowing this to happen, my parents weren't worried that I suddenly was gonna A, want a Christmas tree, and B, somehow reject my Judaism. It wasn't an issue. This is what Kelly's family did. And then Kelly could come over for Shabbat dinner, and we could share that. Right, that was a great experience. So I got to go to church with friends, and my friends came to synagogue with me. They came for Shabbat meals, and we shared other meals. And I can remember I had a great American history teacher in high school, Mr. Senior, and he, as part of our studies of immigration to the United States, he asked every student to talk to their parents and their grandparents about when they came to the United States and from where. And then we had a party where everyone brought something from their family's background. And so we had mandolin, we had cannolis, and we had Bavarian pretzels, all homemade. Like amazing, amazing foods. And we had dim sum, and we had, I can't possibly remember all of these foods. And it was such a great experience. And that's, by just being open, that's something that we were able to share with each other. And it doesn't make you any less connected to your community that you're sharing this food, or you're sharing this experience. And in fact, the ability to be able to talk about your own community and share it with someone, and then turn to someone and say, no, this is who I am. Can you tell me about yourself? Whether you're talking about, did I come from the United States? From Jamaica? Did someone come from another place outside of Canada? When did you come to Canada? Were you, were you always here? It's not that you want to walk up to someone and say, where are you from? I assume if they're in Canada, they're from Canada, unless someone has a particularly heavy accent, in which case I might ask, I might, if I'm talking to the person, I'm getting to know them, I might say, I noticed you have an accent. Were you born here, or were you born somewhere else? And I usually ask it that way because, by the way, my daughter, sometimes she's been here since she's 3. Mostly she sounds like a Torontonian. Once in a while she sounds like a New Yorker because both her parents were born in New York. And sometimes she was born in North Carolina. And every once in a while it ekes out a little. Suddenly she sounds like she's from the South somewhere in the US. And so, here she is, this strange little enigma in terms of her accent. So you can ask that question. My own accent has bits of pieces from everywhere I've lived, and even some places I haven't. For whatever reason it is, I say banana and I say tomato because I spend way too much time with the person who is my assistant and my very close friend, Beverly, and she was born in South Africa, right? So somehow, somewhere along the line, I somehow absorbed those pronunciations. So it doesn't really matter what you look like or how you sound. We all pick up things from everywhere. And no one should be making judgments, but people should be sharing who they are. And if you can do that, if we can be that potluck, that we're the best of all of us and we can share it, then we can go ahead. I see Carrie has a statement or a question. Go ahead.
Yes, thanks. Hi, I'll have to go pretty soon here as my husband's getting ready to go to work soon. But yes, I'm really missing Jewish Toronto right now. It'll be coming up to a year and a half by the fall, and hopefully we'll be able to cross the border and come back and visit. But I definitely feel even more Canadian being down here in South Dakota. We have one rabbi for the city of Sioux Falls. That's the Chabad rabbi, Alperowitz of South Dakota, a beautiful young couple. Right now, like everybody else, it's online teaching. But I'm hired it's actually a big company based out of France, but it's less than a dozen staff on board, and I'm their token Jew. And it's quite cute when the manager said to me, now this Shabbat that you have, is it every week, like all year round? And it's such an experience for them. And then every so often, like today, he approached me because they wanted to thank the staff for working extra hours coming back after time off. And he said, now remind me, it's pork that you can't eat, right? I'm like, yeah, that's right. Pork, no shellfish. So it's for them more than me in some respects in the workplace anyways. It's a cross-cultural experience to have a Jew on board, and they accept that I won't work on Shabbat. And thus we're working extra hours this week outside of Shabbat. But yeah, we plan to celebrate Canada Day down here. Not sure how yet. And USA Day, as I call it, Saturday. So thank you for doing this, Jennifer. I'm sorry I haven't been too much in the loop for a while here, but look forward to connecting however I can to Beth Zedek and hopefully in person with everybody by the fall.
Well, I hope we'll all be able to. It's very nice to see you.
Yeah, you too. All right. Well, Kol Tov, everyone. Okay. Later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
But I think what Carrie had to add was really important, because it's also good for those of us who have never been a minority somewhere to have that experience. It's not such a bad thing, but it can give us two things. One, it can show us that experience of being a minority, but it can also show us if we are the token, whatever, for a little while, how annoying it can get if you're constantly leaning on that one person to be the token. So if you always have to explain every Jewish holiday, sometimes it gets a little tiring. You want to say, look, there's this great website. It's called, like My Jewish Learning. Go look it up, right? And you want to be able to say that. One of the things that's happening with the polls in the U.S. right now with the Black Lives Matter, not the organization, but the movement, the polls are saying that people are a lot more positive. Within the Black community, people are a lot more positive that change will happen. And the reason for that is because others are getting involved. It's not just the Black community saying this is important, but rather the entire community saying this is important. So, as Jews our whole community has to be welcoming if we want our Jewish community to be welcoming. If we want the general secular community, the outside community, to be welcoming to everybody, we also have to build those bridges. And it's like that gentleman who from the Lubavitch community who was in that protest said, if we're reaching out in solidarity and allyship, that opens the door to building real allyship. And that means that we're going to have a better tomorrow. So if we can take the time and do that, then you have a workplace where they're reaching out and saying, hey, we want to be able to do this for you. We want to know what you can't eat. We want to know, we want to make sure that work isn't a problem for you and that we're doing it, we're being appropriate, we're doing it right. Then we're going to have a better society if it's coming from the other side. If Carrie had to constantly say, yeah, I can't have that, or I can't work that day, and have to do it over and over again, that's when you get just eroded in your ability to speak out. But if we're constantly involved, if we make sure that we have a presence in the greater world, then hopefully the message comes through, both to our community internally, and to the external community. And hopefully we can work together to make this a better place, and we can have real allyship. And if that means, I know that there are some of those for whom this is a major problem. And like I said, if you're interacting, you will eventually have intermarriage. There are worse things in the world. And it's, as a rabbi, that's hard to say. It's not that hard to say. There are definitely worse things in the world than intermarriage. We hope that we can bring people into the Jewish community, but I'll say, a friend of mine who grew up in the Jewish community, but she married a Catholic, interestingly, someone whose father was Jewish and mother wasn't, and she's now Catholic. When she had someone at her work who was thinking about getting engaged and was looking towards trying to figure out where he felt about his Judaism. And I said, we had a long talk, and they said, this is something that you and your future spouse have to think about in terms of what's important to you and where your religion is. And you have to decide how you're going to do this and what you're going to do for a future family. And that's all important. It's my job to teach Judaism and to bring people into the Jewish fold and to encourage Jews to be involved in their Judaism. So teaching is both internal and external. Encouraging Jews to be involved in their Judaism is much more internal. But it's also my job to help make this world a better place. And if that means that we can understand each other more, there are going to be both positive and probably some negative consequences to that. And intermarriage is one of those things that happens. And that happens as long as there have been Jews. I'm certainly not going to solve it, and neither is anyone else. And the negatives of being so insular, either being put into insular communities by the outside or putting ourselves into insular communities, that's not going to make it better. And so we really need to be involved in doing all of these wonderful things, involved in creating a better world. And if one of the ways we do that is by interacting with our greater community, that makes all the difference. That drash that I started with, and of course I closed it, so I'm going to see if I can find it again. That drash I started with that spoke about celebrating these holidays, and where this person became so upset about what I had said. One of the interesting things is I ended with a road not taken. poem, Not Taken. And it talks about the path. You know, I took the road not taken, and that has made all the difference. Is the line from the poem. And if we just take the paths that we've taken before, nothing's going to change. So we need to build that better world. We need to, what the Toronto video said, we're a better city. We're a great city because we have all of these wonderful multicultural opportunities. Because, and some of the things, one of the places that shows up there, we have the Aga Khan Museum, and we have Jewish cultural centers, and we have other cultural centers, and we have communities where anyone can come and learn about Judaism, about Islam, about Christianity. We have interfaith groups, we have multicultural groups, we have wonderful communities. We have Taste of the Danforth, celebrating Greek culture. We have Chinese New Year. We have Jewish holidays. So that just makes it a better place to live, a far more interesting place to live. And I truly believe that if we're involved in learning more about others and in teaching people about others, about ourselves, then we become much more strong in who we are. And so hopefully that'll lead us to better understanding, both of the other people, but also of ourselves. So I'm gonna close with that unless there are more comments or questions. Okay.
Yeah, just thank you so much for doing this. And I know it's our last session, so
So
hopefully we'll be back in the fall. And I really appreciate you taking the time and all the research that goes into it. So thank you.
I echo that. Thank you very much. Really interesting and inspiring. Thank you.
it's very nice to see and to speak with all of you. And I really enjoy doing these things. And I want to just say also, if there are topics you'd like to hear about, either let me know or let Chloe know. We'll be trying to come up, with the whole schedule for next year and see what's interesting, what people want to learn about. And when we're able to be together physically, we'll do some more in-person events. We'll do it again. All right. So be well over the summer.
Be well, safe and happy travels.
Thank you. I'm really not going to see anyone. It's basically be like me and the kids, and I'm going to go to my mother's house where I come back, and we're not going to see anyone while we're. I might see my aunt from a socially distant.
Yeah,
Hello. So that'll be it. So thanks.
okay.
Okay, thank
Thanks
you.
again. Good night.
Take care.
Night.
Night.